Mr. Morris, the school head and the school motto, "The only rights you have here are to eat and breathe." Being a child is about learning to be an adult, and it can't be a vulnerable child's fault if they are led into making mistakes by an adult authority figure. Can it? Barrow Wood, a special needs boarding school for troubled children seemingly by design for the abuse of vulnerable children. Take a damaged child and damage him further. Take little notice of the complaints and then deny all liability when you get called on it. Childhood sexual abuse does not just end when you turn 18. It's a life sentence of painful memories and erroneous assumptions about others that can, in the right circumstances, lead to serious mental problems. The last thing a victim generally wants to do is talk about it, so without the right support, things in later life can become a living nightmare. Think about that for a minute. You might jump when you hear a gunshot. What if that gunshot was anything to do with a school teacher, or social worker, and you felt one of them was falsely accusing you of abusing your own child? Derek's 5th request of his son's new school, after a few problems, and nearly 2 months after his first. "Has anyone contacted my son's scout leader yet?" "That's not our job. Speak to the social worker. There has been an abuse allegation." Derek asked me, "Is that not a direct child abuse allegation directed toward the child's father?" Social worker, "I won't do that. Somebody in the office will." Then, 6 weeks later, CAMS, who had not even met the child, are suggesting foster care. This, 2 weeks after the social worker told Derek there was nothing to worry about, and that she was going to close her case. This came about after Derek confronted her with respect to his being accused of abusing young Daniel by a school teacher. Derek told me, "I had all the help my son needed on the end of the phone, but then we had a bloody useless social worker and an overworked work-to-rule school teacher with tunnel vision getting in the way. We think your son might have mental problems. We think your son might be being abused. I've run the case past CAMS who have suggested foster care appropriate." Why? Because Daniel has a touch of autism, or as others put it, delayed development. Hardly a surprise, as he had a troubled birth and came with an education statement from the day he started school. Think about that for a minute. This is your son or daughter, who clearly has special needs, as prior to this Derek had made no less than 6 requests of anybody in authority to just make a simple phone call for the lad. The shrink Derek felt forced to take his son to see. "They've got the wrong idea and run with it. I'll have a chat with my boss and take it on as a case." Daniel's scout leader, "Tell them I want contact with anybody concerned with your son before somebody makes a big mistake." To crying shame, Mum's answer to the problem was to jump into bed with her boss. "Walk out on your kids with a text message and come and live with me. It's an easier life over here without your stressed out husband or kids." Derek told me, "When I was a teenager, I never understood why I get really bad vibes anywhere near anybody who sounds like a window salesman, or people who smile or scowl out of place. By the time I did understand, it was simply too late to change the vibes I get from some people. Everybody who knows me knows I have an issue with people who sound like pushy window salesmen. You know, too many positives and affirmations of things that just don't sound quite right. Like telling people they've done well when they've clearly done far from well. It all comes down to one line this smiling paedophile told me as he was grooming me for things. I'm not gay because I'm married with a daughter. It was obvious to me that this man who was in a position of trust over me was A, gay, and B, wanted to take things a lot further than he did. I was a small 15-year-old boy and did not have a clue what was really going on. Once I understood where things were going, I became really frightened at the potential of catching AIDS. As a 15-year-old child in 1985, I knew AIDS as a gay disease leading to a painful death, like some of the children I had seen on the television from Ethiopia. I was equally frightened of telling others what this housemaster, Mr. Hastings, was doing as the head of the school would routinely punch children who caused a fuss. Not only that, Mr. Hastings was pally with a lot of the hard nuts in the school, so I didn't want to get on the wrong side of him. Whenever I in later life heard anything that sounded similar, and by that I mean just not quite right, or saw people who try hard to be friends, or if I saw a smile that was out of place, it set up in my head the same warning vibe I had when I was a 15-year-old child. As a result, I just kept away from anybody who did it. That'll be about 90% of people who I later met, especially smiling school staff, and people who try hard to be friends. It led to my later finding it really hard to talk to, let alone be friendly towards other people. It led to a situation in my head where I felt it wrong to even know a child's Christian name, let alone be seen talking to even my own children. Derek knew recording a meeting at one school and taking it to the head of another school would put an end to his marriage. But after his wife Laura went chasing after an affair rather than help him with their child, he felt he could trust nobody else. Derek felt the social worker forced on the family was less than qualified. That's the public version. Especially when she, like the school, refused to make a simple phone call. This was the third social worker, as the prior two could find nothing wrong, but the school just kept calling them out. It really felt to Derek like his son sneezes and they call out a social worker. Daniel was playing up to the favourable attention for all it was worth. He would, and the school should, have known this, as in his prior school report he was described as eager to please. But the new school called it attention-seeking, and made out like Daniel had a problem. If you tell a child he's got a problem and can't do something, give him license to be late for class, then tell staff to reward him by telling them not to set him any homework, you'll give them a problem. Derek told them it was a bad idea when they insisted on putting these 4-inch fluorescent, what they called help cards on Daniel's school diary, advertising he had a problem and telling staff not to set him any homework. The school spoke about individual education plans, so Derek rather assumed Daniel would be set possibly different homework, owing to the fact he was a little behind. But there was no unique homework, rather no homework. When Derek challenged the school as to why his son was not being set homework, he was simply told, children in the lower sets don't get homework. When Derek took a folder of work Daniel had been doing for him into school, as he was not being set any homework, he was told, it looks like a different child. But nothing came of it. When Derek told the school he had extra funding, and the possibility of outside teaching staff being involved in helping his son, the school did not get back to him about it. Daniel even sent into school a letter requesting more homework, but nothing came of it. As you can see, this child needed just a bit of help with at least his writing. The school were being paid a lot of extra money for Daniel, because he came with an education statement which they used for teaching assistants, but nobody could take the time to set him individual homework tailored to his needs. Very soon, Daniel learnt that because he had a problem, the reward was less work and more free time, so he played up to it and got into trouble. Derek seriously thought it was a formula designed to cause a problem from the outset, and encouraged him to remove his child from the school. Now don't get me wrong, by this time Derek knew he was having runaway thoughts, but nobody would contact the only support he had, the local scout movement, and very soon Laura, his wife, who had little thought for the children, was well into and making it obvious she was having an affair. Then, as you might expect from Daniel, came the stories. Don't tell my dad, he'll beat me with a stick. And they were stories Daniel had taken from the little he knew about, and then exaggerated from his dad's childhood. The social worker told Derek after nearly 2 months of bumbling around that Cams, who had not met his son, were of the opinion he should be in foster care. In a fit of desperation and right on the edge, Derek went back to the school and asked them again to make his phone call, now his 5th request, and the teacher replied with, "That's not our job. Speak to the social worker. There has been an abuse allegation." As she turned and tried to walk away, it was only a request for the school to make a phone call. What with his own childhood memories getting in the way, Derek after this just went from one panic attack to the next and sent Laura right into the arms of Robert, the guy she'd been chasing after at work. Well, he offered her an easier life, without Derek or the children, and knew exactly what he was doing. Walk out on your kids with a text message after your partner susses out your affair, and you're never going to get custody no matter what stories you might later invent. It was clear to Derek, knowing his wife, that there would be a story of some sort. Derek told me, "Now I know I have an issue trusting school staff, and I just can't help it. I knew at the time I did not have all the information, but all I could ask myself was, if you wanted to encourage a parent to remove their underachieving child from your school, how might you go about doing it? You know, like in the real world." I had convinced myself, maybe wrongly, that it was all about school league tables and how to get rid of a child they didn't want. I just could not get past why the school would not make a phone call for a child they were being paid a lot of extra money for, and who was then using their own words, clearly in need of help. They described it as an urgent issue, but they would not even make a phone call for him. All they did was give it to this useless social worker and shut the door. Derek told me, "The worst thing the state ever did for my children was when they forced me to deal with an incompetent social worker who did not listen and just followed the lead of school staff." Derek told me, "The tipping point came when some idiot wrote the number for Childline in the front of Daniel's school diary, an instruction from another social worker who had not even met the child. It was like, we won't make a phone call for your son, but he can call Childline. Daniel seriously thought it was a game. Hey, look at this, Dad." Just think what your reaction to that might be if you had been asking over and over again for your son's school to just make a simple phone call for your son, and they refused, accused you of child abuse, then you find somebody has written this in your son's school diary. Daniel was simply an easily led autistic spectrum child who had no idea what was going on. If the school had, like the head stated in his preschool speech, contacted the prior school after the first few problems, they would have known this. Derek's position and authority as a parent was totally undermined, and being falsely accused of abusing his own child, what with his own childhood memories getting in the way, really sent him over the edge. The school head, in reply to Derek's complaint, "At no time did the school make a child abuse allegation." Plausible deniability. Well, nothing was in print, but the social worker was going to close the case 2 weeks earlier. Fact. Nobody had ever suggested abuse before the school did, and nobody had since. All they did was lead a vulnerable autistic 11-year-old child into telling and exaggerating various stories. They then refused to make a phone call to sort things out, and gave it all to this social worker without a clue. The Scout movement had this child sussed out the day they met him with a quick conversation. It's because of ideas that have been put to him. He's a child who likes to shock people. It's caused by negative attention, and Daniel feeds off attention. The school were being paid a lot of extra money for this child, as he had an education statement, and they would not even make a phone call for him. Social worker, script 101. Let's talk about foster care and see if that gets a reaction. All Derek saw was his own childhood, danger for his son, divorce, and not any help. By the time somebody used the word abuse, Derek was in a really bad way, nearly 2 months after his first of 6 requests for anybody in authority to just make a simple phone call for his son. Derek was sexually abused when he was a child in Barrow Wood School, and ran away missing all his childhood examinations, so knows better than most what child abuse is all about. Don't apologise for anything it might imply we've done something wrong. Let's just tell a pack of lies and make out like Derek gave us the wrong number. Come on, he won't be able to do anything about it. Derek told me. 100 to 1 they did not even try to make this phone call before they, with their false allegations and talk of taking one of my children into care, drove me to a nervous breakdown nearly 2 months after my first request. After I went running to an MP and got to view Daniel's social care file, they refused Derek a copy of it. There was no mention of it, and the handwritten note I gave the social worker with the Scout leader's phone number on it was nowhere to be found. Some people suggested Derek was wrong to covertly record various meetings, but this kind of explains why he did it. Years ago, when Derek was a child in Barrow Wood and his mother complained to Surrey County Council, refusing to send him back, they just threatened to get legal and did not answer her complaint. When her boyfriend directly challenged them to look at the whole picture, they just broke off communications. Half the staff in the place were eventually jailed for offences against children. Despite the complaints, nothing was done until a parent witnessed a child being assaulted by the school head, and the police made an investigation. It was a private school and we only sent the children there. We might have been told, but it's not our fault, is it? Not if we can sidestep the complaint, pass the blame off to somebody else, or just blame the poor procedures in place at the time. There are seemingly hundreds of people like Derek in the country, and all they want is an apology. If Surrey County Council had followed up the complaints made by Derek's mother and boyfriend, to the point they actually visited Derek when he was a child, no doubt other children could have been saved from the same pain Derek later experienced. The pain of having childhood memories of abuse that nobody, most of all the victim, really want to talk about. Get over it. It happened years ago. It's not a switch that you can just turn off. It would be better called a mental issue with so many triggers. Derek asked me to be blunt and to the point. Do you have any idea what it's like for a small, frightened 15-year-old child to be 150 miles away from the only person he trusts, his mother, while his only other would-be adult friend is plying him with cigarettes and sexually abusing him? Can you get anywhere close to understanding the fear of a 15-year-old boy who finds himself in bed with an adult while the adult tries to stick his thing up the child's behind? This in a boarding school full of a number of troubled children, made worse by the system in place, and a great deal of the staff who were abusing them. It was quite a simple formula. Military school, physical punishments for speaking out, let alone doing anything wrong. Treating the children like they were worthless, telling them they had no rights and their parents were powerless to help them. That's before the children turned on each other. Then a friendly hard-nut member of staff offering protection, giving out free cigarettes and inviting children into his room for a smoke. From this point on, Derek saw people who were nice, or even any man who just called him by his first name, as dangerous, so 9 out of 10 times he just walked away. As you might expect, Derek's trust in social workers, adult men, and the school system was shattered, and he is very careful about who he calls a friend, or who he lets near his own children. Derek told me, "Nobody thought to actually talk to me, the child, about things. Food for thought, if my mother had sent me back like the law apparently required, she, knowing only some of what I experienced, would have been committing child abuse by today's standards." Just think about that for a minute. Would you send your child to a boarding school where you knew he was being abused because some shirt in an office told you they could find no evidence of a problem? The fact they did not send out a social worker to visit Derek when he was a child just shows how hard they tried in looking for the problem. Sometimes, when children get bitten by a dog, they may spend the rest of their life living in fear of dogs. They may think inside their heads that all dogs are bad and want to bite them. They may spend their time looking for dogs just so they can keep away from them. They may fear being in the same building as a dog, let alone the same room. When older, they may teach their own children to fear dogs. Few people will understand their fear of dogs or how they can get paranoid about having to face up to even the friendliest of dogs. They may never be able to fully trust a dog. If they ever have to face up to a pack of growling dogs, they may become really scared and, in some cases, suffer a nervous breakdown. Some dogs will pick up on this fear and bite, because they see anybody with this fear not as a threat, but as an easy target. Some really nasty people may set things up so they are left alone with a pack of dogs, knowing their fear and the effect it will have on them. The same goes for a child that has suffered child abuse at the hands of school staff. It's a shame, as no matter how the cookie crumbles, school staff would have to ask themselves why this child, now a father with his own children, looked like he was bricking it every time he came into the school. Without the support of his wife, it could only ever end up in tears and made Derek an easy target. It's so easy to kick somebody who is already on the floor. A lot of children come from a broken family where mum and dad get divorced. Sometimes dad may have done a runner, never to be seen again, and in this case the child may well go off the rails. Sometimes the state suggests a child who has gone off the rails is put into care, and suggests a special school away from their only remaining parent. They sell it as the best thing for the child to support them, but in Derek's and a number of other children's places it was one of the worst things that could have happened to them in their childhood. It's really easy for a privately run school to abuse children placed into their care. A child in this situation, who grows up to have children of their own, may really fear divorce, not to mention the fear of ever having their own children taken into care. The school head and his school motto, "The only rights you have here are to eat and breathe," kind of says it all, really. A lot of people would not believe what you can manipulate a child into doing, and how using fear you can sometimes keep them quiet for years after the event, even when they become an adult. People who have never been there will not be able to understand this fear, and how it can live with a child for years after the event. People who have not experienced it won't have the capability to understand how a child can grow up thinking everything was really their fault. Most people should be able to understand how a man's wife may be the only person to know all the details about how he was abused as a child. Ask yourself, if it were you, would you want to tell others about it? No matter how many shrinks you saw or what counselling you had, would you ever be able to truly get over it? You can't ever remove a memory. The best you can do is to learn to live with it, understand things were not your fault, and hope the memory or emotion that goes with it doesn't take over your life. Derek told me, "Speaking from experience, unless you're at the top of your game, it really isn't that easy." There is no worse crime than being an adult in a position of authority, frightening and then sexually abusing a child. Then being this child with nowhere to turn. Just imagine being this child, now a parent, doing your best for your own children while your wife is out chasing after an affair, then being subjectively accused of abusing one of your children by a teacher who won't even pick up the phone for him. Has anybody phoned my son's scout leader yet? That's not our job. Speak to the social worker. There has been an abuse allegation. Social worker: "No, I won't do that. Somebody in the office will." Nearly 2 months later and still not having made the phone call. I've run the case past CAMS, who have suggested foster care appropriate. The muck had to hit the fan eventually. Life is what you make it, and if you don't look after your children, shame on you, and you too may just end up living in a 1-bedroom council flat with nothing. Laura, Derek's wife's text message: Sorry, I'm not coming back, I'm with somebody else now. If you abuse a child, don't forget one day they will be an adult, have memories of the abuse and people who abused them. Everybody is different, and what any child in this situation will do with their memories is anybody's guess. The first and most important people a child should be able to turn to in the event of a problem are mum and dad. Who do mum and dad turn to when they need help? Well, Dad turned to the church, the Scout movement, his employer, his parents, and eventually a children's ambassador. Mum turned to her boss, a manipulative old man who saw an opportunity and talked her into walking out with a text message. Derek told me, he's welcome to her. After the divorce, they got married without even telling the children. You have to see it from the mother's perspective. Life was not that easy with a challenging child. Her husband, who was normally a confident man, was getting stressed and frightened when the school called in the social workers, and even more so when they all refused to make a simple phone call and started talk of taking the lad into care. As Laura had been chasing after her boss, looking for an easier life, the fuse was lit when the social worker, like the school, refused to make a simple phone call and then started talk of taking the child into care. Now put yourself in the mind of Derek, whose worst mistake was keeping quiet about things when he was a child, because the bastards used fear and systematic emotional as well as physical abuse that left him fearful of school staff and seriously emotionally damaged. That was until he got all religious and turned to God, or his interpretation of God. Maybe there is something in John 8:32. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.